All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Experienced Grad York session from York International. So welcome, York International. Mayuri, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Eileen. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mayuri, and I am here on behalf of York International. My colleague Samantha Yan is joining as well, and we are two of your international student advisors and immigration specialists on the team here. There's a larger team that I'll introduce you to shortly. So you are joining us today to learn a bit about study permits, regulations and rules and how to apply for a study permit, just to give you some insight as you prepare to apply to York and prepare to hopefully soon arrive in Canada. So we're going to start first with a land acknowledgement. And York University recognizes that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been taken care by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So just some reminders about Zoom etiquette. There will be links that are shared in the chat during the presentation. But participants will be asking questions if you have any through the Q&A feature. What I'll encourage you to do is please hold on to your questions until the Q&A portion, because you may find that the questions that you're asking are answered throughout the presentation. But we will be using that Q&A feature to support you with your questions. So our agenda today is a quick introduction to York International, what is this department, what do we do, a bit about the study permit application process, including the documents you'll need and eligibility requirements that you should prepare for, and then our Q&A session. So York International is a department and hub at York University that is dedicated to the needs of international students and domestic students who wish to work or study abroad. We have a number of components to our department and services and resources that we offer, some of which are listed here. So UHIP stands for the Universal Health Insurance Plan. So you'll need health insurance once you're here in Canada. Student programming, so that includes programming for grad students as well, as a way for you to connect with your peers, get to know the city, get acquainted with the campus as well as Toronto. Of course, immigration advising, and that's the section of the team that Samantha and I are here to represent today. And Go Global is a section of our team that manages incoming and outgoing exchange opportunities, work or study abroad. So this is our international student advising team. There are 5 of us. You'll notice that each of us has a designation under our name. So each of us is licensed to practice immigration law. And this is very important to take note of because only a licensed person should be giving you immigration advice. We know that, of course, your friends and family and others you know who may have gone through the immigration process will want to give you advice and tips, and that can be valuable to an extent. However, keeping in mind that each person's immigration situation and set of circumstances is unique, and that's why it's important to obtain immigration advice from a licensed representative. So each of us is licensed. You'll notice that we also have the languages we speak listed under our names because we can provide advising in those languages as well. Important note on our scope of service. So although we are all licensed professionals and we can represent people on their immigration matters, in our capacity as advisors at York, we have a certain scope. And so what's in scope is to be providing general guidance and feedback for individual situations. We do review refusals to an extent, not in depth. We'll look at like a refusal letter, give some, again, general guidance based on your circumstances, but what's out of scope would be an in-depth application review, reviewing or confirming supporting documentation, or confirming eligibility or admissibility. These would all fall under the responsibilities of a representative. And in our role as advisors at York, as immigration specialists at York, we would not be able to represent you. We have a number of immigration advising services and resources that we offer. So this page gives you sort of the main categories. The first on the left is the immigration application resource page. So we will be sharing, perhaps Samantha can share a link to that in the chat. And that is our page where we share different guides on how to complete your major immigration applications that you would encounter as an international student. So at your stage, that would include applying for an initial study permit. For current students, that would include how to extend a study permit, how to apply for a co-op work permit, and so on. So this page contains helpful guides that students can use to help navigate their application. Zoom virtual advising, we have a group Zoom that we hold a couple times a week. Students can drop in. It's not booked. You can just drop in during the scheduled time and speak to an immigration advisor. The immigration workroom is an in-person group Q&A option. So that's also a couple of times a week. Once you're here in Canada and you want to meet with an advisor in person, you can do so there. And it's also especially good if you are working on a specific type of application. You want to bring your laptop, you have specific questions on, certain fields in your application form, for example. It's easier generally to do that in person. So we encourage students to attend that. We also have topic-specific Q&As, and our main topics throughout the year tend to be related to the study permit extension application, as well as the post-graduation work permit. We have other topics as well, all of which are listed on our York International calendar. So that link will be shared as well in the chat, and that is where you will find the various advising sessions that we host. Finally, last but not least, we have reaching us by email, which is iadvisor@yorku.ca. We do encourage you to try to access the options sort of in the order they're listed here. So, checking to see if there are answers that you need on the immigration application resource page, attending one of the advising in-person or virtual options or topic specific. And then if you're unable to find an answer or unable to attend these sessions, then please feel free to email iadvisor@yorku.ca. All right, so without further ado, we're going to dive into the heart of the matter, which is applying for a study permit from outside of Canada. This is an overview of the steps you need to think about in terms of when you're going to apply. So step one in general is you're gathering your documents, completing your forms, and submitting your application. Two would be completing biometrics if required. We'll get into, if that's required and how to do so. Medical exam. Three, you would be monitoring your IRCC account for any requests for additional information or updates on your decision. And four, you're going to receive a final decision. So this is just meant to be a very high level overview, and we're going to break this down further in our session today. So these are some important concepts that we wanted to start with in terms of legal terms and immigration documents, just to familiarize yourself with what is what. So often students will refer to a Canadian visa, right? A student visa. And we just wanted to first start off by differentiating what's the difference between a study permit and a visa. So you'll notice on the very right-hand side of the slide, there is a picture of like a brown piece of paper, and it's a study permit on top of it. And that is a study permit document. You will receive this document once you arrive at the border. So upon, let me start right from the left-hand side. When you're approved for your study permit, you will receive the letter of introduction that's on the left-hand side of the slide. And so that letter is what you're going to bring to the border. If you're from a visa requiring country, then you will have the visa, which is in the middle of the screen, of the slide. Some of you might be from countries where an electronic travel authorization is allowed. So you wouldn't have a visa, you'd have an ETA. And so with these two documents on the left, the letter of introduction, the visa or ETA, that is what will allow you to travel to Canada. Upon arriving to Canada, you will meet with a CBSA officer who may ask you some additional questions to determine your eligibility once more before you're allowed to enter. And at that point, you'll be issued a study permit. And so that is the document that's on the far right-hand side. And we have some reminders here to make sure to always check your expiry date, as well as checking the bottom of your study permit to make sure that it lists conditions that allow you to work. As graduate students, you will, based on the fact that you are studying in a program that's longer than 8 months and you're at a designated learning institution and so on, you should have the conditions to work on your permit, which will of course be important for you in future opportunities to be a teaching assistant or be involved in research or any sort of employment that you want to pursue in addition to your studies. So you'll need that those conditions listed there. So there's no expectation for you to commit any of this to memory. It's more just to give you an overview of the key documents that you should expect to receive once your study permit is hopefully approved. Now, there may be a situation where your study permit, it could be denied as well. And we just wanted to flag here because sometimes in our webinars, we have students who have received a previous refusal. So if that is you, making sure that before submitting a new application, you are addressing the reasons for refusal. And how do you do that is you review the reasons for refusal. Now, on this slide, we talk about GCMS and ATIP notes. GCMS stands for Global Case Management System, and that is IRCC, Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada's system to keep notes on any immigration applications that you've submitted. An ATIP is basically a request to obtain information about your file, and so you can do that to obtain some additional information about why your application was refused. Now, most recently, IRCC has updated their refusal issuance process, and they include something called ODN notes, Officer Decision Notes. So your refusal letter, if you have received one very recently, or God forbid you receive one in the future, it should contain some more detailed reasons than was previously available, which may mean that you may not necessarily need to order your ATIP notes. The main point of this slide is really to get across that if you have received a refusal, you should carefully review those reasons for refusal and be addressing those reasons in your subsequent application. So in general, a study permit is required to study in Canada for any program that is over 6 months long for all foreign nationals. So in your case, as graduate students, you may be studying in a program that is at least 1 year for master's students, and then of course going up to a longer period for PhD students. And we want to emphasize that you should put your best foot forward with your application and ensure that you're including all mandatory and supporting documents. So if this is not an application to be rushed at all, right? You need to take your time with it and be very meticulous in your preparation of the application, and keep your eye on the timeline. From what I saw from the registration, many of you are hoping to attend York in 2026 September. So I'm glad you're here to get this information as early as you are, because you have a good large runway to prepare, but making sure that you're diligent from this point on to submit a strong application means you're taking your time with each component of it. The final bullet point is to remind you that decisions are ultimately up to the discretion of the visa officer. And the reason why we mention here that nobody can guarantee a positive result for you is also to remind you that, let's say you are going to hire a representative, a licensed representative, be that an immigration consultant or a lawyer to help you with your application. Be wary of anyone who tells you, yes, for sure, you're going to get approved, because absolutely nobody can guarantee you that. What someone should be able to offer you is to say, let's put the strongest application we can forward on your behalf, right? And maximize, so you can maximize the potential of success. So keeping that in mind. All right, so we're going to move on to gathering the required documents. And this is a review of the major components of your study permit application. And we're going to break down each step in some more detail. So we'll review the letter of acceptance, provincial attestation letter. What is it? How do we obtain it? What is a study plan and letter of explanation? And finally, proof of financial eligibility. One reminder that we like to insert right at the start is keeping an eye on your passport expiry date. Because immigration documents, Canadian immigration documents, can only be issued up to the length of your passport. So if you are going to be applying for a year-long program or 4-year-long program, making sure that your passport extends beyond that date so that your study permit can be issued for that time as well. Okay, so we're going to jump into the first component that I mentioned, which is your letter of acceptance. So once you submit your application and you're accepted to York, where you would find your letter of acceptance is in your My File. And on this slide, which you'll receive as well, there are indications of where you're going to find your most important documents. What I'd like to draw your attention to today is the admissions letter section of your My File. That is where you will find your decision letter, your visa letter, which is the letter that you're going to submit with your study permit application, your provincial attestation letter, which is the second document issued by the university that you're going to submit with your application, and proof of payment receipt. So if you do pay any money towards your tuition in advance, then a payment receipt would be made available there. The second major component is the provincial attestation letter. So just in case some of you are not aware what is a provincial attestation letter, I think many of you would be by now, but it basically is a document that is issued by the government where the designated learning institution you're attending is located. So in this case, if you're applying to York, it would be the Ontario government that works in collaboration with each university to issue this PAL. And the PAL is essentially accounting for the fact that you are going to be attending York University, that you have a spot here. There are only a certain number of PALs that are issued per institution. So that is why each student who's applying for a PAL, for a spot at an institution must also have a PAL. So how do you obtain a PAL is a popular question that we get. When you accept your offer, accepting the offer triggers an automated PAL request. So you don't have to do anything additional. There's no tuition deposit that you need to pay as graduate students. It's different for undergraduate students, but for graduate students, you're not required to pay a deposit. Simply accepting the offer triggers the PAL request, and then it'll take a bit of time for that PAL request to be processed. I believe it's 3 to 5 business days. And then it'll appear in your My File. This is true for every faculty except for Schulich and Osgood Professional Development. So if there are any students from either of those faculties and you have questions about the PAL, please let us know and we'll address it then. And then that's it. You simply access the PAL in your My File, and then you will download that and keep that as part of one of the documents that you will submit with your application eventually. A popular question we also receive is, what if my letter of acceptance is conditional? This is pretty common. One of the most common conditions that you will find in any acceptance letter is the condition to submit transcripts, right? So there's not really such thing as something called an unconditional letter of acceptance, nor does York or most institutions issue this unconditional letter of acceptance. But it is a question that we get because sometimes this language is used depending on the visa office instructions you're reviewing or things like that. So if you, because you'll likely have a conditional letter of acceptance or something that indicates that your acceptance is conditional upon submitting X document, let's say, how do you address that, right, in your application to say, that I have met the condition or without providing a new letter because that doesn't exist. So the answer to that is that you're going to address that very clearly in your study plan. So you will confirm whatever the condition is and whether or not you have met it or when you will meet it. So your study plan essentially is where you're going to provide information and confirmation of that. And this is just a QR code to access my file. I don't think you need to access it right now, especially if you haven't applied or you're still waiting to hear about a decision. So just knowing that my file is the main place for you to access the documents you need is sufficient for you to know for now. All right. We're going to move on now to the third major component, which is proof of financial ability. So I know usually this is the most popular topic, and I want to set aside enough time for us to address your questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to do a more high level explanation of proof of financial ability. So most of you will be going through the regular study permit stream. On this slide, we have two streams that are listed, which is the regular study permit stream as well as the Francophone minorities study permit stream. We can talk about that in some detail during the Q&A if those of you who think you might be eligible for that. This is for French speaking applicants who are from certain regions. There are certain eligible countries that you may be able to apply through this stream, but I'm going to focus on the regular study permit stream, which most of you will be eligible for. So basically, through the regular study permit stream, you should be prepared to demonstrate your ability to fund, and we're talking liquid funds, fund your studies for the first year in Canada. So this means that you're able to show that you can pay for your first year of tuition fees, your living expenses for 1 year, and your living expenses for 1 year. So both of these things. And the minimum requirement for living expenses as of September 1st, 2025 is $22,895. Now, as graduate students, one of the questions that we often get is, well, I have funding. What about funding? Does that count towards financial ability? How do I demonstrate that? So we're going to cover that a bit, and I'm sure it will come up through the Q&A as well. But we really do want all of you to think a lot about funding, about your funding, how you're going to demonstrate to the IRCC officer that you have enough money to study in Canada, because of this requirement to demonstrate that you have enough money to pay for your first year tuition, your living expenses, not only that, but your probability of funding for subsequent years. So this is a major part of the process in preparing for your study permit application. We're going to break this down a little bit further in the next couple of slides. So a popular question that we get is, do I need to provide proof of paid tuition? Because yes, this is sometimes indicated in local visa office instructions. There was at once upon a time something called the Student Direct Stream. Some of you may be familiar with this. SDS was the acronym. And in that stream, you would have been able to provide like 1 year's worth of paid tuition, and that would help you move your application through the line faster. That SDS stream is closed. So now when we are asked this question, do I need to provide proof of paid tuition? Our answer is that yes, you don't need to provide it, but will it strengthen your application? Very likely, yes. So it is considered a component that could strengthen your application, enhance your credibility as an applicant. So even if it's not required anywhere by IRCC, you should consider paying some portion or the full portion of your tuition if you are able. All right, so keeping that in mind. The other thing I wanted to point out here is checking your local visa office instructions. So Samantha could please share the link to how to check your local visa office instructions. This is important because there are general IRCC requirements that apply to all applicants that you should be looking at and making sure you're meeting the requirements there. But you should also be looking at your local visa office specific instructions, because sometimes, depending on the visa office, there are certain requirements that are unique to the visa office that you're applying to. As an example, I believe it's Turkey that requires 6 months worth of bank statements, whereas Pakistan doesn't specify a number of months. It says several months of bank statements. So you want to make sure that you are looking at the visa office instructions from the region that you will be applying from and making sure that you meet the minimum requirements that they mentioned there, because IRCC's generalized requirements is 4 months worth of bank statements, right? So that's why you want to check both places and make sure that you're following the specific requirements of the visa office that you are applying to. Um, in terms of show what documents you need to show that you've paid tuition, you can access the receipt in my file, as I mentioned earlier, within 4 to 5 days from the date when the payment is received. Your student account would also be a good thing to print out to show that there is a credit balance in your account. So this is the $1 million question. What if I received funding? And again, this is a short form answer, but basically it's if you received funding, you definitely need to, and you're relying on that to show that you have the financial ability to study in Canada, then you absolutely need to include a copy of your funding letter or scholarship award letter. But we put a big asterisk beside that because it is highly recommended that even if you have funding, that you demonstrate that you still have sufficient funds to cover your tuition fees and living expenses for you and your accompanying family members, if you have any, irrespective of the funding that you've received. So instead of counting on, let's say, your funding to say, well, for living expenses, I have, this funding that's going to come in for me in year 1, 2, and so on, you actually want to show that you have the funds to study in Canada, regardless of that funding. Now, I've talked to many students over the years that are like, well, if I didn't have the funding, it actually wouldn't be possible for me to study in Canada. I don't have an independent source of funds to show that I can study in Canada. I'm relying on this funding, and rightfully so, in the sense that, like, that's what's making it possible for you to study in Canada as a graduate student, that like funding is part of the incentive too, right? All of that makes sense. That being said, what we're seeing more and more is that there is a higher threshold. There is an expectation that just in case that funding doesn't work out for whatever reason, that the applicant, that the student has their own source of funding so that they'll be able to financially sustain themselves in Canada while they're here. And that will be assessed in your application. So in summary, either if you have the independent source of funds, irrespective of your scholarship, highly recommended you go down that road and you show that you have your own funds if you're able to. If you're unable to, know that this will make your application a bit more complex. Know that you will need to make it very, very clear that you are relying on this funding. How does this funding work? So your letter should be able to explain that, and you should be able to also lay it out for the officer in a very clear way that this is funding that you are going to receive, that you can rely on, and that it is sufficient to cover your tuition fees and living expenses while you're inside Canada. So if you are going to be, all of you should be as demonstrating some of your own funds, regardless if you're getting funding, right? And so we have a couple of slides to explain how to demonstrate the origin of your funds. So this is another very common question that we get, like what types of documents do I need to submit if I'm trying to demonstrate that I have enough funds? And so if you are, we have two columns here, as you can see. If you are employed by somebody, there's a certain set of documents. And if you're self-employed, there are some other considerations to think about as well. So regular employment, you want to think about bank statements. And this slide indicates last 4 months, but I would edit that to say 4 to 6 and probably 6 to be more cautious. And it also depends on the types of transactions in your account and what you're showing, right? So the bank statements in general need to show a consistent history, right? Of like a good balance, right? That there's money in the account. There should be no recent like large deposits. And if there are, then you need to be able to explain them. So you want to pick a period of time, minimum 4 months in a minimum of 4 months, but 6 months if you can, if you have like a clean transaction history that shows a strong balance, consistent sort of income coming in from your employer, that type of thing. And of course, I want to put another asterisk, remembering to check your visa office instructions too, because it could be that they actually require 6 months. So that's something to keep in mind. The other is a notarized letter of sponsorship. So if you are an applicant who is going to be supported by someone else for your studies, it could be a parent, a spouse, or so on, then you want to make sure that they write a letter. And it's best if this letter is notarized by a notary or a commissioner of oath in your country of origin. Submitting a proof of relationship. So again, if you are having someone else show that they are supporting you financially with your studies, you want to establish that proof of relationship. In the case of like parent and child, that would be like a birth certificate. In the case of spouses, that would be a marriage certificate as an example. You'd also want to obtain an employment letter, a reference letter from your employer confirming that you're employed, your salary, how long you've been employed, what do you do there. It shouldn't be very long, maybe a page, but it should contain those key details, along with your pay stubs, of course, to prove that you have been working for this employer, that you've been getting paid by them. And if you have a work ID, then that's a good thing to include as well. If you're self-employed, it gets there's some additional considerations to keep in mind. So business registration documents would be an additional thing to think about. So proving that your business is registered. So government issued registration documents are best to include. An accountant's letter, so prepared by a chartered accountant, and it would confirm the legitimacy of the business, the revenue that the business has, instead of just your word or just simple bank statements that show, okay, there's money in the account. A much more credible document would be your accountant letter, as well as a statement of net worth, for example, tax clearance certificate. So these are examples of things that you can include. So what you need to be thinking about as a self-employed person is, how do I prove to IRCC that I have a legitimate business and I have a legitimate source of income that has been assessed by somebody other than me, right? Like a professional, an accredited professional other than me. So this is the accountant's letter. I'm not going to review this because I just explained it. I'm going to move on to the International Student GIC. So some of you may be familiar with this. GIC stands for Guaranteed Income Certificate. So for international students who are applying to study in Canada, it is a good idea to obtain a GIC if you can. What it is you can use that to show that you have set aside funds already for your living expenses for a year, because remember, that's one of the requirements, right? So what is a GIC? It's a fixed term investment with a guaranteed interest rate that is offered by most Canadian financial institutions. How it works is you would invest a specific amount. We recommend that if you can put aside the stated amount for your 1 year of living expenses, which IRCC wants you to show that you have 22,895. If you can go ahead and purchase a GIC for that amount, that would be ideal, right? What would happen is that the bank then in Canada would hold on to those funds. Over time, you would earn a set out interest rate on that balance. Once you arrive in Canada, you would get a portion of those funds released to you, and the remainder would be released over an 11-month period. That's how most of these GICs work, right? But most importantly, what does it do for IRCC? It shows IRCC that you already have funds placed in Canada set aside for your studies, right? So they know that it's already secure here. And again, this goes towards your credibility as an applicant, that you are coming to Canada as a genuine student and that you have the funds to support yourself. Okay. Now we're going to move on to study plan. And what is a study plan? So some of you may be familiar with this. It's also referred to as a letter of explanation, and it is a critical document that outlines your intention in pursuing an education in Canada. It is usually 1 to 2 pages. I'm going to put in another reminder here to check your local visa office instructions because some of them will specify very specific questions that they want you to answer as you are writing your study plan, right? And so the primary purpose of your plan is to justify the necessity of why Canada, and specifically why the institution that you chose and the program that you chose. How does this program align with your academic background and future career goals, and the relevance of this study to your future career goals? And this last line is really important. You should be specific, factual, and practical in your study plan. So some examples of things not to say would be, I want to study in Canada because it is a beautiful multicultural country and it is very diverse and it is safe to study there and things of this nature. This is not helping the IRCC officer understand anything about you and how you're connecting your studies in Canada to your own personal and professional development. Because after all, that should, in IRCC's eyes, that should be the reasons that you're explaining as to why you want to come to Canada. As graduate students, it is actually a different level of explaining that you need to do versus undergraduate students, because from high school to undergrad, there are some automatic assumptions, like you're going to go on to post-secondary anyways, and they've taken a variety of subjects in high school, and so they have to do less in terms of making a connection between high school and post-secondary. As graduate students, you have already done your post-secondary, your first level of undergraduate studies. So the onus on you to explain the connection between your undergrad and your graduate studies is higher, right? It is unique. So you need to be able to explain, like, why am I choosing to pursue further studies? Many of you are at a stage in life where you might be leaving aside family obligations or taking a pause from your career. Like this is a big decision you're making for yourself. So that needs to reflect in your study plan, right? Your thought process, the intention that you put behind this, the planning, why York, why this program, how is this going to benefit you? This is, I'm sure, stuff you are thinking very carefully about, right? What happens in sometimes with refusals is that students are not and applicants are not taking that thought process that they have gone through meticulously, and they're not translating that into the study plan. So that's what you need to be able to do, is make that connection, help the IRCC officer understand, and also provide some very tangible examples. So for example, like why are you studying at York versus an institution in your home country? And be specific, right? So as an example, I know of a student who said she wanted to study psychology. This is in Canada. And she said, well, there's not really psychology programs in my home country. But we learned that there is psychology programs in her home country, right? So that wasn't exactly true. The difference, though, was that there were more research and co-op opportunities for her in the program in Canada versus the programs available in her home country. So that was a distinction that she could draw. So is there a researcher that you want to work with? Is there a specific niche or area of study that you're interested in? You can describe that in a few lines. And then the final thing I'll say here is really also focusing how this is going to connect to your future goals once you return to your home country, right? Because you need to be able to demonstrate to the IRCC officer that you will leave Canada at the end of your authorized stay, right? Even if you have any thoughts of, hopefully applying for a work permit to stay in Canada, and maybe even eventually, there is a pathway to PR for international students. So even if you have those hopes and dreams and plans to work your way towards that, in your application, you need to be focused on letting the officer know that you understand your responsibility to leave Canada at the end of your authorized stay. And one of the ways that you do that is demonstrating that you have employment prospects based on this program that you are completing, right? So is there a need for students or employees with foreign international education rather from Canada? Is that going to give you a leg up in the job market, right? Do you have some students have submitted a letter from their employer to say, like, once this person gets their education in Canada and comes back, they have a position here, and they provided a letter to that effect. Others have submitted some research that shows, like employers are looking for people with an international education and that they're looking for this global experience. So if you're able to point to very specific examples of that, that is going to go a long way in your application. So other documents to think about, just to give you a preview, is that you may be required to complete a medical exam depending on the country that you're living in. It's highly recommended to complete this up front. So just keep in mind when it comes time to apply for your study permit, double check if you're required to complete a medical exam and do that upfront rather than waiting like till after you submit your application. Biometrics are required for anyone who is 14 years old and up. It is not required if you completed it in the last 10 years. So I know some folks have been to Canada before. It's not your first time. And so you may have completed biometrics at a previous time. So just making sure that you've completed it in the last 10 years and also that it is valid for the time that you need for your education. You would be required 80 to pay $85 fee for that. So just noting that, you'll see that once you work through the application and any other forms or documents. Again, another reminder here to check your local visa office instructions. As well, if you are submitting any supporting documents from your home country, reminder that all documents must be in one of Canada's official languages, which is English or French. If they are translated, then you must provide a certified photocopy of the original and an affidavit from the person who completed the translation. So in other words, a certified translations. This is just a little, did you know, sort of tip. If you need to provide additional documents or update your application with IRCC, you can use what's called the IRCC web form. So you'll see that when you get around to submitting your application, there is a size limit on each section for you to upload your documents. And so if if after you use a PDF compressor to kind of compress the size of things and you're finding that you still need some room, then you can also update IRCC via web form. I will add a caveat to that, which is to say that again, in this process of preparing your application, you still want to be selective about the information that you're providing. You want to ensure that every document you're submitting has a purpose, right? Has weight, because the reality of the situation is that IRCC doesn't have more than 10 minutes per application to review on average. They're not spending a lot of time on each application. They can't because there's so much volume. So you want to be very organized and very purposeful with each document you submit. So although we're saying if you have additional documents, then submit it through IRCC web form, that doesn't mean throw everything at IRCC that you have. It means be very selective. And if you feel that you have additional documents that are really going to add weight to your application, substantiate claims that you're making in your application, then you have this avenue to submit those additional documents. So I've covered a little bit about medical exam already, but just mentioning that there are country-specific requirements. Some of you may be required to submit a medical exam. It's not required to submit it upfront, but we recommend that you do to help speed up the processing time. Biometrics, same thing. You can use something called a biometrics check status tool in case you don't remember if and when you've submitted biometrics in the past. For those of you who might have accompanying family members, So your spouse, common law partner, and or dependent children may apply to accompany you to Canada. Their applications can be made together with yours, which is more common, or separately after your study permit is approved. So minor children intending to study in Canada should apply for a study permit, although for them, no letter of acceptance from a DLI is required. As for your spouse or common law partner, they may be eligible for an open work permit. If you have a valid study permit, so if you're approved for one and you are studying in either a master's or doctoral degree program, the master's program has to be at least 16 months, I believe. So that's the only way your spouse or common law partner may be eligible. If your accompanying family members are not working or studying, then they should apply to come as visitors. And then this slide just talks about funds required for accompanying family members. So remember earlier on when I talked about demonstrating funds, I was talking about a single applicant, right? But for every family member that you are adding on, then this chart demonstrates like what is the level of funds that you need to show that you have available that is excluding tuition and your transportation costs. All right, so that concludes the content of the presentation. I'm going to share a bit about contact information now, and then we'll open up the Q&A. If you have academic questions, questions about enrolling in courses, your degree requirements, and things like that, then your faculty is and your graduate program director or graduate program assistant is the best place to turn to. So please do reach out to them if you have questions of that nature. And if you need more immigration support, we'd love for you to take down these QR codes. I think the links are being shared in the chat as well. So as I mentioned earlier, the York International Events calendar lists all of our advising sessions. The virtual, the in-person workroom, topic-specific sessions are all listed there. So please bookmark that and attend one of our sessions if you have additional questions. We have our immigration application resource page. So that's where we have our application guides. And then you can email us as well at iadvisor@yorku.ca if you are unable to reach us or don't find the information on our webpage. And that concludes our session now, and we will move on to Q&A.